Kwekwe, Monique Manatch, Indigenous. Kittikinik Anishnaabeque and Dojaba. Hi, my name is Monique Manatch. I'm a member of the Algonquins of Barrier Lake, and you're here listening to Indigital Insights. And today we are very fortunate to have Nova Courchene speaking with us to tell us all about her art and her work and how it all intersects with traditional values and digitization. Um, Nova is a member of. I didn't ask if you remember. You're from both the Sagkeeng First Nation and Rolling River First Nation, Anishnaabe, Ojibwe, and but you grew up in Treaty Seven territory, near the Siksika Nation. And I'm wondering what was that like. I'll start with that. If you want to introduce yourself a bit and tell us what was that like to be immersed in Blackfoot culture and yet be from Anishinaabe culture.
Sure, yeah. So growing up, I was 4 years old when we moved to the community just outside of Siksiga, the Gleason, and then Strathmore, and then eventually Calgary. And my mother was a teacher on the Siksiga Reserve at Tifold Sun School and has been an educator for the past 35 years and now retired. Um, Growing up in Treaty 7 territory. So my mom um, is a 60 scoop survivor, reconnected and reunited with her mother, who is from Rolling River First Nation. And uh, my mom had always relied on the knowledge that her Anishinaabe knowledge that she knew growing up through my grandmother. And when we were in Treaty 7 out in Alberta, she always made sure that she was sharing those traditions as we were integrated and immersed in Blackfoot language and culture. I actually remember being in the AM kindergarten class and taking Blackfoot language lessons. Um, and My mom and my dad actually didn't have their own language, even though both of them grew up with the Ojibwe language and Anishinaabe before they were 5 years old. So my father is a residential school survivor, and so both of them wouldn't have had the gift of language after they left their homes after 5 years old and 10 years old. And so grew up remembering my dad always telling us that we needed to learn our language. And a lot of my cultural knowledge gained by my mother was through powwow dancing. And so I started dancing when I was about 8 or 9 years old. And my mom picked the jingle dress dance for me because of our Anishinaabe heritage, and knowing that that jingle dress was gifted to the community by Maggie Smith, who was the first jingle dress dancer, and so she felt it would be applicable. So that started us on the powwow trail with Blackfoot family, the Scout Blocks, who were Blackfoot from Piikani and from Siksiga, and they were our guides, and they showed my mom about the pieces of a traditional. My brother was a traditional dancer, my sister was a jingle dress dancer, and I eventually switched to fancy. And so they had this great knowledge of all the regalia and all of those other things. But my mom, staying true to her Anishinaabe roots, used a lot of floral designs in what we wore. And so I remember being a young teen and wanting so badly to fit in and noticing the difference from simple visuals of geometric designs at the time. I think they do now use flowers in their costume. Regalia, sorry, it's not costume, it's just regalia. And so growing up, I noticed that and I saw, oh, I don't really fit in. I'm a little bit different because I have these florals on my regalia, and they have the geometric designs. And so um, I remember calling my grandma to ask if I could wear a headband. And my grandma must have heard how much I wanted to wear a headband when I was dancing. And she's like, yeah, I think that would be fine. Go ahead, make one. And so I made a little floral loom pattern and then wore it for a few years as a fancy dancer. And that's a really close memory to my heart because I wasn't connected to my grandmother Jean on my mom's side from Rolling River, as we were, as she hadn't been a part of my mom's life until later in her life, and then our life, we were separated as I was in Alberta and she was still in Winnipeg. And so, um, noticing those small differences was great. It was beautiful. It was my first introduction into the intricate details that each nation has and those differences, but again, sort of those overarching principles and natural laws that exist for all First Nations people. So I think that was a really beautiful eye-opening experience as a child to experience.
That's wonderful, and it's so wonderful that your grandmother was that accepting to say, "Yeah, how you with the headband." That's fantastic that you were able to incorporate everything that you are and everything that not just by blood but by environment that expressed yourself, helped you to express yourself. So how did you started off as a powwow dancer? So how did that progress into your focus on art?
Yeah, so I'm what we would consider probably a middle-aged emerging artist. Although art has always been art, music, and theater have always been a massive part of my life. I used to study music with the Royal Conservatory uh, as a flute player, and I've worked in theater for the past 15 years, longer than that now. And I was working in the music industry when I eventually moved back to Winnipeg from Toronto. So, in all elements of everything that I did, a lot of what I did was administrative heavy. And so I worked on festivals, I was learning about music recording, music production, excuse me, and working at Native Earth Performing Arts in downtown Toronto. And I eventually finished college in Toronto. And um, I did notice that a lot of the work that I did produce would also have a lot of visual elements. And I really enjoyed painting, and I've always enjoyed drawing. And people would always be like, "You're really good at that," and I would be like, "Oh, it's just a hobby. It's just something I like to do to calm me and give my brain a massage because it really helps my flurried mind focus and reconnect." And so it was a sort of a gradual shift. I'm the co-director at Native Youth Theatre. I write and I do visual murals with a school division here in Winnipeg called Pembina Trail School Division. And so, in my role as a co-director at Native Youth Theatre, I had graphic arts backgrounds because I studied Adobe Illustrator in college, and so I started to get used to using it. And then I started developing posters and handbills and all of these other items for the program. And I was like, "Oh, I'm good at this. This looks good." And people would say the same thing. And so I had been doing that for the past 10 years. And so my sister, who's runs a nonprofit, recently started up a nonprofit comedian comedy, women comedy, Indigenous women comedy festival called Indigital, asked me to do some of the graphic design work for that festival. You can actually see a poster and some handbills that I made for her Vancouver show on my wall. And so I worked doing some of that, and I can't really remember how I made the jump from that graphic design art to the physical mural painting, but um, somebody at Pembina School Trails asked me to if I could do art, and I was like, yeah, sure, why not? So I created the 13 Ojibwe moons theme, and then we painted it on one of the middle schools in Winnipeg. And then this past year, Ralph Maybank Elementary School commissioned me to do a 7 teachings painting. And so I have that was the start of my visual arts. And then there was a shorter non-permanent mural project that I did with Anish Corp, which has rebranded, and I think they're called the Anish Healing Center now. And they asked me to come out to a women's gathering event, and we used large format paper. I brought a projector and I brought some of my art, and we had a few kids show up, and I showed them my process of drawing my ideas, sketching it, and then taking a picture of it, sketching it in Procreate or Illustrator, depending on how I feel about what that style will look like, putting it on my computer, adjusting it so that it is framed properly, and then tracing it and then painting it. So that was just another short version of some of that work that I've done. And I've also just completing a project with Sagkeeng Education Authority, where I developed the layout and the outline of Wanda Barker, who's an Anishnaabe Moan teacher and speaker and extraordinaire, champion and advocate for the language, exercises for their school division, not school division, for their school. And so she creates the exercises that the children do. And I did 60 illustrations, the layout and the graphic design for 5 language books, which also have flashcards, counting exercises, and a few other things that we're just finishing up. And so that's some of the other graphic design work that I work on. And before that, at Frontier School Division, I was working with their Indigenous language coordinator to help develop some uh, touch point classroom resources for Indigenous languages, mainly Cree and Ojibwe, and then we had some Dakota, and they were working on getting Inuktitut at the time of me leaving, and Dene, and there was a few other languages that they were working to help create resources for. So yeah, that's about how a condensed version of how I got to that visual arts part of being a professional artist.
You seem to work a lot with sort of that crossroads of cultural content and digitization, or where you're taking the content and you're making it into something that language resources or learning resources. And how do you find that? I know sometimes using the culture in that way can be you kind of have to walk a fine line there a bit.
I could get into the language part of it because, like like I said at the beginning of my interview, where I had learned the differences but similarities between Blackfoot and Anishnaabe, it gets even more detailed as we get into communities. And so, even something as simple as some of the spelling and some of the translations in Anishinaabe Moan, say, even from my mom's reserve, Rolling River, and my dad's reserve of Sagkeeng, they could be different. They can have different ways of saying things and different ways of spelling things. And that's a whole conversation about the language never being written, and what it looks like to write it now. And that is incredible. It takes a lot of work. I know that there are people who are for standardizing the language with the double vowel system and syllabics. And I know there are people who are just want the language to get out there and be used. And I'm, yes, tiptoeing both. I agree that standardization helps, but I have seen different people from different communities expressing themselves online, say in a Facebook forum. I actually belong to a lot of those language pages where people come in and ask, "Oh, what does this mean? What does that mean?" And then they'll spell it out phonetically. I still know what they're talking about, but that doesn't mean that there's value in that standardization. And so, unfortunately, there are some hangups and some snags when it comes to developing language resources for different communities. So, for example, with Frontier School Division, they have like 43 schools, I think, now across Manitoba that they serve. And some of those language teachers in the schools will disagree on the way that the language is applied, and there always needs to be a medium ground or someone to be able to take that over and apply it so that it gets to the classroom. And there's a lot of things that are layered into that as well, and this doesn't happen just with Frontier. It happens across all communities. So another component is the fact that most speakers of languages are nearing 60, 70, and 80. And then there's that drop off of my generation and Generation X. So anybody who's under 50, 40, 30, 20 who don't have the language because that residential school brainwashing worked in telling our parents that our language would be useless to learn. And so a lot of us young people who are now starting to get up into our 40s and 50s are like, what do we do? How do we bridge that gap between our speakers and our kids? And it's happening, and it's beautiful work, but it's hard work. And I hope that as a graphic designer and someone who can throw on culturally and locally relevant visuals on even just as simple as a workbook of the language, help to bring the language to the kids and to how they speak it. And just as further to my graphic design work in language, I also am doing a little bit of language work in my drama education and in the theater side of what we're doing, because when I only most recently about 2 years ago partook in, oh, that's not a word, only about 2 years ago I was a part of a 28-day Anishnaabe immersion language camp. And even the lessons were provided in Anishinaabe. And Pat Negwans was the instructor and the person that got that camp going. And so in that camp, a lot of the exercises were sketch based. So we would come up with plays and then memorize what we were trying to say in the language and then read it to each other and act out our little skits and sketches. And I thought, well, I do this all the time with kids. Why are we not doing that in theater? And so I now have worked in my drama education. There's drama warm up games that we get kids to come out of their shells, warm up their voices, work on improv skills. And I've started to bring the language into that. And we have an outreach program out of Manitoba Theatre for Young People that we, this year, especially, I think I can't even remember how many communities we've gone to this year. And it was our first year offering outreach as Native Youth Theatre. But we had so much great success with improv games and using the language that the community uses. And we didn't write anything down. We just sort of pulled it from what we knew and then asked elders or language keepers in the schools or in the area, or even the kids themselves, how they would say bear, how they would say eagle. And so we worked all those pieces in. And then we also did script writing and used dialogue also to in the language to mix it in. And so I think it's just a really beautiful thing that we were able to do that. But yes, I hope the next step is to develop resources that we can bring. So when we're, say, for example, I turned this drama warm up game called Big Booty. It's a counting game and a rhythm game. And I turned it into Anishnaabe, which is, I think I might be saying it in Cree because I played it more in Cree and then in Ojibwe, but Mahijit, which is like big ass. And I would like to be able to write the numbers down so the kids can just glance at it as we're playing. Just things like that.
I totally know what you mean about everybody writing in their own way. In my community, there's no standard orthography at all. How people spell is as unique as their signature. So you can tell who's writing something simply by the way it's being spelled. Oh, that's Marianne. She does that, or that's Janine.
Right.
They do it this way, or that's. So it's very unique to the individual, let alone. And then there's a community about an hour and a half south of my reserve um, who speak a different dialect. So and even the way that the language in Kitigan Zibi, it's more musical. It's more the tone is more has more in fluctuations. But in my community, it's more of a monotone.
Yeah.
So you can, and the words are slightly different. And there are a few, I know of one woman in particular who, Kokum Shirley, she can speak both dialects. And so it's like, thank goodness for her because she's the teacher of the immersion program. And she says, well, you can spell it this way, you can. So she's a wonderful resource to sort of navigating all of this, because there's so many different ways of looking at it and so many different ways of presenting it. Do you find that there are protocols around how this knowledge is transferred? People say, well, no, you can only do this in the winter, or no, you need to tell them this way, or no, they should be learning it, while they're doing, while they're doing a certain activity. Is there anything like that you've found?
Yeah. So first and foremost, the what do you call it? Crediting the language speakers of the local community needs protocol. It's always just like we can offer tobacco and then we're going into a classroom and seeing what they've handmade and how can I get that into a print project. But I also like it's such a gray area, and I'm all about featuring the speaker and featuring what they're knowledge and their understanding is, and their personal touch on the language, like you were saying earlier, is. But that's really hard when there's nothing in place other than our own reciprocity and understanding what it means to credit the people that are providing the translations. Because I actually had a conversation with an intellectual property lawyer about what those credits look like and how much that would cost for an honorarium and how to manage that. And that lawyer told me that there is no laws or anything like that that says that translations can be copyrighted, which makes sense because we that would be a huge impediment to sharing the language, which at this point with some endangered languages is really important. And so I feel that that sense of community um, gets a little bit lost when we're looking at all the minutia of all those different components that comes to crediting and listing and thanking and honoring and providing gifts for people who have the language and paying them in a way that is respectful. And so there is protocol, but it's not set across um, the forum or the country or anywhere really. And so I think that's a really important gap that needs to be minded at this point. And as for other um, traditional knowledge and ceremony and all of those kinds of things, like I'm one of those grassroots people that are working with kids face to face in their schools and in their communities. And in my it works in both ways. In my visual work, graphic design, and in my theater work, I am bringing knowledge that they may have never heard of, and they're Indigenous kids, and it's tough work because we're thinking like, oh wow, we really see a lot of things that need to be done here to help them understand and get them to a level that they know about these things. And even, for example, if I paint a mural and we explain the animals and get the translations, they go back and they ask their parents about those sort of things. And it really starts that conversation at home about language and about the cultural teachings and significance behind all of those items. And the same with drama, like when we bring Nanabush stories, some kids on reserve have never even heard of Nanabush. Um and then, for example, when you were saying, just ringing a bell now, that we don't talk about Nanabush when there's no snow on the ground. But I offer theater programming, and if we want to do stories of local legends and local tricksters, what do we do? How do we go about that? How are we doing that respectfully? And are we mentioning it before we start our play? Are we mentioning it before we start working on a mural? Any of those things, right? So that's a really big gap too. There's no protocols built around those, and we're all sort of just kind of like, feeling in the dark and trying to be as respectful and trying to have that reciprocity in place so that we know that our knowledge was taken from us and that we're trying to reclaim it. And what does that look like?
I know what you mean. Yeah, it's the winter is a time of storytelling. Um, because our ancestors, that would be the time when, we do stay close to home and we do, there is hunting or trapping, but there's less foraging and gathering. Whereas we live in an agrarian society. And so it's not the same. It's not, the actions throughout the year are not the same. and the kids aren't even in school during the summer, but they are during the winter. So how do we balance that? How do we balance the cultural ways of passing on knowledge versus the society that we are living in, and which has been imposed in our communities, whether it's a reserve or a community that hasn't got reserve status.
Yeah.
But how do we keep those cultural priorities alive and well and passed on to our kids? Do we tell, what do people think? Do we tell Nanabush stories in the summertime? If it's a good learning tool, and it's the way. I think our people are adaptable. That we'd have to have been.
Yeah.
But I know that can be a real concern, especially to knowledge holders, knowledge carriers, elders. That okay, then that tradition and a way of doing something, eh, we're just not going to do that anymore. Like as we reclaim our culture, how do we manage to hang on to these transference protocols?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, how do you feel about the use of digital in capturing, preserving language and videotaping elders, and then how those videos are then shown or exhibited? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a that's a complex issue because I think that we touched on a really great component of that specialization of the language, that individualization of the language, and when when it's recorded and disseminated en masse, you lose those components, um, and I understand that, but at the same time, I'm also, looking at the other side and saying, well, my grandmother passed. I am probably never going to get to learn the way that she spoke Anishinaabe, but I still have to try with what I've been given. And I heard a quote, and it's been in my head for many, many years, but I can't remember who said it. I think it was a chief of a nation that was talking about language reclamation, and they said something about the language being the vehicle on which culture is transported on. And I thought that was really deep and relative because it helps understand that that's how things move. That's how things are moved from point A to point B. And the language is going to move from point A to point B. And what vehicle we're using will change. One day it was people dragging it, next day it was horses, and now it's motor vehicles. So, what does that look like? And how is that going to impact the language? And further to that, I understand the fear and the protectiveness that a lot of knowledge and cultural keepers have because they've already been through the loss of that and what it would look like on the other side if they were to lose it again in a different way. And so that protectiveness, I think, is important for us to honor and work towards healing to sort of help us all get into a place that feels right for all of us.
I know what you mean about that's a wonderful quote about that the language is the vehicle that the culture is drawn on. I always wondered because our language is so locative. There are places in my community or in the territory that the words and the names for those places are words in our language, and they remind us of what events have occurred there, or maybe where something grows, or maybe where something happened or something grows, or where ceremonies occurred, and it grows. Those words grow to have meaning in our language. And so when those territories, in my community, it's logging, where they clear cut, then they come in and want to mine. So when that territory has been irreparably damaged, what happens to those words?
Yeah, it's the same in Manitoba with the lakes and hydro and the way that they've changed the land irreversibly. Yeah.
So then what happens to a word that is based on this certain location and that location has been changed? Does that word then disappear? Does it, because our relationship with that connection to that land is gone or changed? So what happens? I know our languages have to breathe. They're alive and they need to change in order to survive. Um, but it makes I wonder about this, because when I know, I'm thinking of a particular place that had been clear cut, and it was a place known for moose, where the moose gathered in the wintertime. And yeah, we came out of the bush. I was with an elder from my community, and we're walking through the bush, and he's telling us all these stories about the moose and this and that, and the words and the language and whatnot. And then all of a sudden, he'd brought us to this place, and we just stepped out into this clear cut area. And he's like, my house, like speaking as the moose, my house. And it hit me. It just hit me so hard that, so then what happens to those, what happens to those? Because we're so connected. We're so connected to the land, and we're so connected to the animals and how the cycles. And I mean, I'm seeing it. This particular elder, he's gone now, but he had started he'd started just a casual group with some of the other elders in the community to talk about, okay, well, we need a word for microwave, you know, we need a word for car, we need a word for what have you. And so they all got together, and it was pretty fun because they were all coming up with all these crazy words that would mean certain things. And it's all, um, well, we could, what they decided the definition of the microwave was, or the definition of whatever was, snowmobile or what have you. So yeah, you see how the language has to move forward, and you can see when we, like there was one old woman who was one of the last speakers of Old Algonquin, they called it. And so some of them were able to get videotape of her speaking Old Algonquin. So there's a little bit, but then she's gone. And now what's being taught is newer Algonquin, I guess, kind of laced with different cultures in it, you know. And how does that impact our communities? How would that impact our connection to the land?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I just wanted to share a really funny sort of upbeat story. When we were nearing the end of our 28-day immersion camp, a group of my peers were writing their final project, and they wrote this hilarious sketch in Anishnaabe about, and the premises was that this group of Jangamash, I can't say it, I've lost it, the white person, Jangamashi. I'll
I
have
know a
to look
few
it
of
up.
them.
Yeah,
We say it
it
different.
starts
We
with
say
Shag. Yeah.
Taguichini, or we say Shoganash, or we say Shoganash, or we
Yeah,
say
yeah.
just Justukshu. It's Cree, Justukshu. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, Algonquin and Ojibwe. Yeah, there's a few. There's a few.
Yeah, I think it's Jangamash was what they were saying. But anyway, there's a group of white people who take Ojibwe classes, and other way around. Anishinaabe people that are learning the English language in this sketch, and they're learning English in a really weird way because they're not speakers, and they're like not listening to the English speaker that's teaching them, and so they sort of develop this their own version of the English language. And we just all like, it was just so applicable because when we were not quarantined, we were allowed to leave, but we were all really committed to those 28 days and nights. But we felt that as like intermediate, I was a complete beginner. They were all intermediate, but that they had started to sort of develop their own syntax within the language, and they knew, because we also had other language speakers from different communities come in, they knew that what we were learning and what we were processing was like different from the language that we were being taught. And so it was just a really comical way to remember that, to remember we need to listen to the speakers and we need to do our best by our teachers. But it was a hilarious sketch.
How do you, when you're doing your artwork, how do you represent language in your art?
I haven't really been able to get to that level too, because my Anishnaabe is shaky at best. But I would like to do that. I know a lot of teachers have been asking me that because I've just been doing visuals. I haven't really been doing any of those other pieces, but I'm thinking about it next year. There's a lot of inquiries and requests that I'd love to honor, and so I do know how to read the syllabics Ojibwe chart, and I do have the double vowel system. And so I'm thinking that going forward, it'll be easier for me to incorporate those the standardized versions of both into my artwork. And I think that would really help because, like, even now I'm thinking about like sneaking back into my mural at the school and then just painting the words by hand of the 7 teaching animals, and then writing the syllabics. But I'm a busy person. I have a lot going on. But I think going forward, it'll be really important to just include that in the artwork. And then I know that even with the 13 moons, that there's nothing on the actual mural other than the representation of each of those moons. And I'll show you in a second. But yes, it's you would have to be really you would have to leave information behind that explains what those 13 moons are. And even I would love to get it more interactive. Like, we had thought that if these mural and visual projects were bigger, we could have a barcode and have an elder speak when you took a picture of the barcode and led you to those teachings, and that elder saying those words for you. And then in that way it would be a little bit more immersive and interactive. But for now, I'm doing what I can do as an emerging artist, and just doing those visuals for schools right now.
That's fabulous. I'd love to see it. Do you have the some
Yeah, I
picture
can
you can
show you
show us?
some of my work.
Yeah,
Here's a little bit of the mural work that I did for the women's gathering with Sagkeeng First Nation. So I just drew this out and then um, projected it. And then after we did that, I added the colors and the digitization and vectorization of that mural. Um, this is the digital version of the Ralph Maybank school mural of the 7 teachings. And I have some photos of that later in the presentation. This is a portfolio I kind of whipped together for people who are interested in my graphic design work. This was a wheel that was developed by, I believe, it was Gory Walker in Norway House, Cree Nation, based on the 13 seasons that the Cree people use, similar to the 13 moons, based on the land. And so I kind of just went through and did the artwork for each of those seasons. You can see there's the goose harvest and this summer fishing and the summer medicine gathering. There's a whole wheel on it. I just wanted to show a piece of it. Just my bio. And then this was a project that we had done for the double vowel system at Frontier School Division. It's a poster size with flashcards that help kids with the pronunciation of those vowels. There was a Cree one as well, but that I didn't add it to this. And so this is that first mural that I did, the four wall mural. We did the changing leaves moon, the falling leaves moon, freeze up. I added this little component of when the earth goes to sleep. And then this one was to represent the three, the Gisi Mandadu, Jesus, the short moon, and there's a third moon in there that I always forget. And then we've got the goose moon, omagaki, or the frog, budding and strawberry. And then we've got our half of summer moon, and then finally the wild rice harvest moon. And again, these moons all changed from different communities because different things happen and are of significance in different communities. So this is one that I had been exposed to by way of Wanda Barker, who does the Wanabagao, which is an Anishnaabe community that's close to the Sagkeeng First Nation. So I figured that locally that would be suitable. This is the Seven Teachings mural with the Ralph Maybank School. This is an elementary school, and I actually, this one I did use. Sorry, I did have the junior high students come help me paint this on the wall, and they were amazing because this was really hard as we use interior wall paint, which is more like glue than paint that they would have ever used. We had to be mindful of the drips. We had to be mindful of the white space, but they did a beautiful job. So for the elementary school, we did a more of a full colored, multiple layers ones because I figured, the motor skills of different age groups are different, and the little ones were able to apply more color so that if there was a mistake, we could cover it up again. So that's why we did sort of the more bold look, colors, shapes, and those sort of things for the seven teachings. And it was really really fun and really challenging. I have a story of one little girl who was asking me a question, and we hadn't started painting yet, but she stepped right directly in the middle of the mural. And I was like, oh, I forgot to say, don't step on the mural. Here's some of the work that I've done for Frontier School Division. Just a little bit of branding things for some of the cultural kits that another person in my department has developed, and then she sort of just needed stickers and items to put on those kits with sort of an infographic PDF about ribbon skirts and some of that research. There's some Ojibwe emotions flashcards with vectorization of some of these characters. And then Dakota numbers. We've got some Cree colors and Anishnaabe colors, Anishnaabe one colors, and just some posters and body parts in Cree and Ojibwe, and posters for events, cultural events that happen at the schools. So just to be clear, I didn't create the content of the next set of items. I just took the layout and took the content and then applied the design and illustrations for these documents. So that this is what they called a language support document, but it was taken from a curriculum for language. And again, that protocol piece is being worked on in terms of what curriculum looks like in schools and in that academic world of teaching and in education. So those are really good work happening. Here's an example of the workbook, the illustrations that I did at the front, the layout, and again, all the writing, all the content, and the exercises are Wanda Barker's work. I just copy and paste it and then made the animal illustrations. There were 60, 15 each of 5 books. And yeah, there's 5 books. The first one is the goose, and then the other animals that I used for the other 4, and they all have similar layouts, and each has a set of 15 animals that I had to draw. We've got the standard Roman orthography of the double vowel system. I made 2 sets of this in Anishnaabe and Indonemoan. Here's a more full version of the 13 circle wheel. And again, I do drama education, so I do a lot of my own graphic design for my events. We're doing this again this year. So I'll be in Norway House working with Kim Helgro, who's also a language learner, and she's a teacher, a language teacher. And so we get to work together to develop more language based learning in our theater programming. Just another event at Native Youth Theater with a friend who I illustrated digitally. Another Native Youth Theater event. And the poster that I have behind me for my sister. And some stickers that I created for my sister and the handbills. And then I had an artwork sale this winter, and so I took some of the components and some new things from all the work, because not every thing I create gets used in my language work. And I thought, well, I guess I could sell my art. So I made stickers and postcards and greeting cards, and then just some prints of some of my work. Here's some more digital illustrations that I do in Procreate. I'm really excited about this guy because this is going to be I always say it wrong, but the Wiskayajak icon and little visual representation for the Ask Yachimona drama program this year. So we're again going to be telling stories in the summer, but we will find out more about how to do that respectfully. Just the illustration and a illustration that's part of a podcast cover. I'll show you in a sec. I do logos. A lot of my stuff is more of that bold, clean lines, but I'll step out of my comfort zone to help a friend. So a film company here, my mom's company, who's a natural healer, and then my own business that I'm currently working on getting set up. So this was Sagkeeng First Nation, Ochi Cree community in northern Manitoba that I do logo and drama work for, and hopefully visual murals soon. Just a little logo I created for our project. Just bigger. This was for a Treaty 3 group. My own. logo for my mom, and then that's the podcast cover for these three who are actually Anishnaabe Moan speakers, and we'll be releasing that soon.
Beautiful work. Absolutely stunning. It's just gorgeous. And I just love that you're doing all this work with the kids and bringing together the language and the culture and that they're able to experience it, and you're doing it in a way that is sensitive to our protocols and sensitive to the way that we normally would have taught the next generations, doing it. I love that you're doing it with theater, with storytelling. you know I think that's so much a part of our culture that we need to keep and instill in the next generations. So it's
Yeah.
fantastic work, amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I'd like to thank you so much for spending time with us today, to telling us about your work and letting us know what's been going on. um, we really appreciate it.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for having me.